There is nothing more bittersweet in Naruto than becoming a Jinchuriki. For many, it's a curse, a plague that is infested within them, often against their will, that causes them extreme pain and shame. For others, it's a gift, a way to access powers that most ordinary shinobi could never dream of. So let's look through the long history of the Jinchuriki to determine which ones lived up to their potential and which were doomed by it. The fate of a Jinchuriki is often one of loneliness and shame. We see even from the first episode of the series that having a sealed beast within him made Naruto a pariah among the other villagers, who were terrified of him. Unfortunately, Bunpuku had the exact same fate. When he was born, Shikaku was sealed into him, making him the One-Tailed's first Jinchuriki. While many Jinchuriki suffered through the ordeal of their existence in utter misery, Bunpuku was a kind-hearted old man who bore no ill will towards the other villagers, who hated him or the monster sealed inside him. Unlike many others, he was a pacifist who was mainly focused with keeping Shikaku safely sealed inside of him. While he clearly wasn't the most powerful of Jinchuriki, for his time he did exactly what was needed of him. His life was spent containing the evil inside for the future of his village, and you can't say that wasn't a success. Naruto's mother, Kushina, had the same goal as her son, to eventually become the Hokage. Unfortunately, she also would go on to become the Jinchuriki of Kurama, the nine-tailed fox. By all accounts, she spent most of her life as a fine shinobi with a forceful, outgoing attitude like her son's. Things changed when she eventually married Minato, and changed her dreams towards something simple like having a family. Unfortunately, simple is a lot more complicated for a Jinchuriki. While she mostly lived as happy a life as the wife of the fourth Hokage, Minato, the birth of her first child made her hold over Kurama weak. This weakness was exploited, releasing the monster to devastate Konoha. While Kushina merely wanted a normal life and a normal family, that desire for normalcy while also carrying such an incredible monster within her was what cost her the family she dreamed of. By all accounts, Fu was a strange Jinchuriki. Instead of feeling burdened or damaged by her fate, Fu was an outgoing and kind person who, even during the Chunin exams, simply wanted to make friends instead of enemies. A lot of this had to do with how Fu was treated by her village. Shibuki, the leader of her village, made sure that she was protected and cared for. Unfortunately, a nice upbeat attitude may have made her a happier person, but it did little to keep threats away from her or her village. We don't know the full extent of her powers, but the most we ever saw was the ability to manifest small wings. Regardless of what her true power level was, it wasn't enough in the end. While she lived the kind of life someone like Naruto would have envied, it ended when the Akatsuki extracted the seven-tailed from her body. Perhaps no character's term as a Jinchuriki had the ramification that Rin Nohara's did in a short period of time. The three-tailed beast was sealed inside her as an elaborate attack on Konoha. Fate landed squarely on her shoulders as she was paired alongside legendary shinobi like Kakashi Hatake and Obito Uchiha, under Minato Namikaze himself. The team likely would have had a similar life to that of Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura, if it weren't for the unfortunate meeting that led her to become the Jinchuriki of the Three Tails. Instead of allowing herself to be used as a living weapon, she made the only call that was available to her. She asked her friend Kakashi to take her out, a choice that saved her village but doomed many other lives. This tragedy was what motivated Obito to lead the Akatsuki to capture the other Jinchurikis. This shows that even the noble, hard choice of someone who had a demon sealed inside them was enough to change the world forever. Yugito is a fine example of what kind of warrior a Jinchuriki can be. The Jonin was trained from a young age to control the two-tailed, and was so skilled that even a shinobi like Killer Bee admired her skill. Her most notable technique was that she could grow her nails at will into claws. Not only that, but she was a decent strategist who managed to lead the Akatsuki into a trap. Unfortunately, even her considerable skill proved to be no match against Hidan. Against the likes of him, she would have needed mastery over her abilities far beyond what she had. Her life ended with what she no doubt would have considered her greatest failure, having the two-tailed beast extracted by the Akatsuki. Utakata was a stoic shinobi who preferred solitude instead of being forced into it. He was able to create powerful water release bubble techniques on his own. As the Jinchuriki of the Six Tails, he had access to the increased chakra and power known to all who had a sealed-tailed beast inside of them. On top of that, Utakata had the ability to access the version 2 form, though he had limited control over it. He was able to defeat 2 of Nagato's paths of pain, but it was ultimately not enough to save him. Utakata shared the same fate as many of his Jinchuriki brethren, a brutal end as the Akatsuki extracted the tailed beast from his body. Blue Bee was a fan-favorite Killer Bee's predecessor as the Jinchuriki of the 8 Tails. In general, Blue Bee had a deep despair over his fate as a Jinchuriki. Despite this, he was shown to have some proficiency with the power. He was able to access version 2 and partial manifestation of Gyuki. In the end, his despair was justified. His life ended with him losing control and rampaging like the monster he always feared himself to be. Luckily, his successor had a much better destiny waiting for him. We only met Han when he was resurrected during the 4th Shinobi War. Even though he didn't have a lot of screen time, it was enough to make an impression. The legendary Steam Ninjutsu Master was one of the most reserved of the Jinchuriki. He was able to access the version 2 form and transform into Kakuo with some control. Han is definitely one of the Jinchuriki who was more of a legend than he was a tragic tale. The first Hokage may be the one with statues dedicated to his memory, but his wife Mito Uzumaki deserves just as much praise. When her village was in trouble, Mito became the first to seal Kurama into herself, becoming its original Jinchuriki. The beast terrified her all of her life, but she was able to keep a hold of it thanks to the love in her life and her immense willpower. She may not have had control over the beast in battle, but her philosophy of using love as a weapon against the monster inside of her led to Kushina and more impressively Naruto utilizing the same strategy. While many sought to fight this fate with hatred or bitterness, Mito used a positive counterweight that proved to be the right choice for not only herself but the entire world. Roshi was the Jinchuriki of Son Goku over 40 years. He was as hard-headed and hot-tempered as you would expect someone with a power over lava to be. He had the ability to enter version 2 and tailed beast mode with a good deal of control. All of his power proved to be little against Akatsuki, who captured him and extracted Son Goku, ending his life like too many of his brethren. Yagura is one Jinchuriki who deserved all of the fear and hatred the rest received needlessly their entire lives. Yagura reveled in using Isobu's powers for his own twisted ends. His reign was known as the Bloody Mist for good reason. He had access to version 2 and the ability to cast tailed beast balls with significant control, unfortunately for those that stood against him. This was one Jinchuriki who was ended by Akatsuki that I really can't feel badly about, even if he was under Obito's influence. Killer Bee definitely has the most unique Jinchuriki tale of the bunch. The eccentric Shinobi was the latest Kumagakure Jinchuriki of the 8 Tails and likely one of the most successful to ever live. Not only was he able to access Gyuki's power, but to master it as well. He was actually able to build a strong relationship with the demon, resulting in him getting a massive chakra boost and the ability to dispel genjutsu. Bee can utilize all transformations including tailed beast mode with full control. Along with that, he can also transform parts of his body into tentacles, generate torpedoes, and fire multiple tailed beast balls. Needless to say, people tend to underestimate him at their peril. What's truly unique about Bee is that despite his incredible skill as a Jinchuriki, that's not even his #1 passion. What Killer Bee truly wants to be is the greatest rapper of all time. Everybody's gotta have a dream, I guess? Gaara was the first example of a Jinchuriki that had a vastly different reaction than Naruto's. While Naruto had some struggles with his early days trying to master his demon powers, they were nothing compared to what Gaara had to go through. While Naruto took the hatred of his village as a motivator, Gaara saw it as an excuse to hate the world. This proved to be a disastrous way for him to live, seeing as it just helped Shukaku manipulate him to commit acts of violence. He was trained as the ultimate weapon, which made him an incredibly successful genin. As Shikaku's Jinchuriki, he was able to control and be defended by sand. Eventually, his lack of emotional control caused him to lose all control over Shikaku, which led him on a rampage as a massive monstrosity. Once Naruto was able to subdue him, however, he decided to emulate Naruto, which led to much more success. He became the Kazekage and became a well-balanced adult. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to save him from the Akatsuki, but it was enough to save him from himself. Minato Namikaze was a success at pretty much everything he tried. He invented the Rasengan, became the 4th Hokage, and was widely regarded as one of the greatest shinobi to ever come out of Konoha. His life as a Jinchuriki began shortly before his life ended, only allowing him to cut Kurama's power in half and transfer the other half of it to his son. He wasn't a Jinchuriki for long, but once he was reincarnated, he was able to master it quickly. He was able to master the Tailed Beast mode immediately. This is insane to think about when you compare it against all of the pain and training it took most Jinchurikis to get to that point. Naruto's Jinchuriki success story is an inspiration, but Minato could have put it to shame. If Minato would have been the lead of the series instead of Naruto, I kind of think Shippuden would have lasted about 10 episodes. Unfortunately, tragedy kept him from truly fulfilling his heroic potential. Perhaps no mortal was more successful at manipulating the powers of the Tailed Beast than Obito Uchiha. His time as the shadow leader of the Akatsuki was devoted to harnessing the powers of the Jinchuriki for his own ends. Obito Uchiha's plans as the leader of the Akatsuki came to its fruition when he sealed the Ten-Tailed Beast into himself. The transformation immediately changed his appearance, making him resemble an Otsutsuki instead of a normal human. He also had to use the truth-seeking orbs on top of a massive increase to his powers. He was nigh invulnerable and much more powerful than pretty much anyone who opposed it. Unfortunately, control over the form proved to be difficult for him to master. While he was a truly formidable threat, his powers weren't nearly that of Madara's when he became the Ten-Tailed Jinchuriki. Hagoromo was the true ancestor to the Shinobi. He and his brother managed to do the impossible and defeat their mother Kaguya. He was then able to seal the 10 tails into himself, becoming the very first Jinchuriki. This set the entire history of the Shinobi world into motion as Black Zetsu manipulated society into ensuring that Kaguya would return. As an Otsutsuki, he was basically a god. He had full access to all abilities granted to him as a Jinchuriki. Ultimately, he faded into legend, but his choices made a permanent impact upon history that few could compete with. Even the tailed beasts themselves had great respect for Hagoromo, whose wisdom and guidance was good enough to get through to even them. In the Shinobi world, raw power isn't always enough. You need to be able to strategize as well. Black Zetsu may be the ultimate strategist in the entire Naruto franchise. As a living embodiment of Kaguya's will, he shaped Shinobi history to build toward Kaguya's return. One of the final parts of that plan involved taking over Obito's body once he faltered. He may not have had control over Obito as a Jinchuriki long, but he was able to reveal his strategies before casting the outer path, Samsara of Heavenly Life technique. In the end, all of Black Zetsu's planning on behalf of Kaguya and his control over Obito was all for nothing against the power of a Jinchuriki like Naruto, who was the only one to see the proper threat he posed. The life of Memna Namikaze is the ultimate look at the road not taken for Naruto Uzumaki. It highlights the age-old argument about whether nature or nurture truly builds a person. While Naruto's life began with tragedy, Memna had the privilege of growing up with both of his parents and plenty of friends. Even the transference of Kurama into him wasn't a painful affair, but a planned ritual to move it from Kushina. Studying under the tutelage of his father, it could be argued that Memna was an even more powerful Jinchuriki and Shinobi in general. Unfortunately, while Memna's skills were great, they were nothing but a dream in the infinite Tsukuyomi. Still, it is worth debating whether Naruto would have been an even greater Jinchuriki if he had the love and support of his family and village versus the challenges the real Naruto had that pushed him to succeed against all odds. In any other Naruto arc, Madara Uchiha would have been the final enemy. Madara was already considered to be one of the most powerful shinobi who ever lived before he became a Jinchuriki to the 10-tailed. I mean, the ninja who took on an entire army on his own really didn't need a boost in power, but he certainly got one. Unlike other Jinchurikis, Madara gained control over his beast immediately. He essentially became a god among the other shinobi. He gained the use of 10 truth-seeking orbs that he could use as powerful projectiles among many other uses. Most notably, he was able to make good on his decades-long pursuit of casting the infinite Tsukuyomi. If it weren't for the final betrayal that saw Kaguya take over, Madara would have been considered the most powerful being Naruto and his allies ever faced. By both enacting plans to utilize the powers of the tailed beast and becoming one of the most fearsome Jinchuriki to ever exist, he represents every way Jinchurikis represent a threat to the entire world. His plans give credence to every villager who looked at their kind with fear and disgust. Luckily, there were heroes to balance the scales and prove that this power could be used to save the world, not just doom it. Of course, Naruto would be the greatest of the Jinchuriki. His is the ultimate Jinchuriki underdog story. Like many of his counterparts, Naruto began his life in tragedy. Both his parents were destroyed the day Kurama was sealed inside of him. He then would go on to lead a life in Konoha, marked by hatred from his fellow villagers for a reason he wasn't even aware of. Eventually, he would discover the nine-tailed fox within him, and would be tempted to use its powers. In the first series, we see him begin to rely on its chakra to fight the likes of Haku and Sasuke. This was demonstrated by what Jiraiya called the Demon Fox Cloak. While it greatly increased his power, it also threatened to take him over. It then became clear that Naruto would need further training to fully get a grip on Kurama. He would go on to use a more advanced form that would see his chakra take on a shape similar to that of Kurama's. This was version 2, or the four-tailed transformation. This form greatly increased his power, but also allowed Kurama much more control over him. Naruto would eventually do the impossible and form a bond with Kurama. The two would actually go on to work together, allowing Naruto access to the Nine Tails Chakra mode and Tailed Beast mode. These forms would give him a bright orange chakra that resembled Kurama, and made Naruto one of the fiercest warriors on the planet. Naruto's success with the Nine-Tailed Fox showed just what was possible for a Jinchuriki to achieve, if you had an overwhelming amount of hope and ambition to counter the monster living inside. Looking back on all the devastation and salvation the Jinchurikis caused, I'm still not sure whether they were the greatest gift to the shinobi world or the greatest curse.